Okay. Uh, Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rick Sterling from WesternIM, and today will be a new Learn With Us session. I want to give you a little background for those of you that may have started to come on to Learn With Us, new to the actual Learn With Us environment. Is during COVID, we decided that people weren't getting, in a RIM community, weren't getting the education opportunities on Canadian content that they needed to get. So we determined that we would set up a session, a series of sessions, which we called Learn With Us. We ran them very successfully through COVID, and we're of course continuing on with that whole series of sessions. The other About 3 years in, we determined that the ARMA chapters, the Records and Information Management Association chapters in Canada, needed some kind of a series of presentations as well. And we added a new series called I Am Canada Connect. And that's brought to you, sponsored by us, of course, but brought to you by the ARMA chapters across Canada, where they put sessions in place so we get education on RIM environment and RIM topics in Canadian content. Today, we've got Troy Sawyer. Most of you know Troy anyway, if you've been on these sessions before. Troy is my very good friend and one of our partners here at WesternIM, Director of Development here at WesternIM. And Troy will be doing the session today on a topic that I think is really, really apropos. It seems to me that everybody I talk to every week, and I do that lots across Canada, has issues and are trying to move to 365, Microsoft 365. And they're in varying stages of doing all that. And so this particular topic of migration of information using Microsoft tools, I think is very apropos. Troy, thanks for putting this together. And I'm going to let Troy talk about himself because he can do that as well. And I'll let you go, Troy.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Rick. Okay, so as Rick mentioned, my name is Troy Sawyer. I work here at WesternIM, as you can see as a background here. I've been with WesternIM for about 13 years. I kind of started on the data analytics side, got into some of the development and kind of further on as a partner here at WesternIM over the past 5 or 6 years. So just wanted to give some context of kind of my position and my work that I do when it comes to SharePoint migrations, is that it is a very small portion of kind of what I do and my day-to-day activities. So I'm going to be approaching this more from, yes, we'll see some technical demonstrations and how-tos and specifics on these tools, but I'll try to get an overview of it and this kind of activity from more than just the technical, here's the application and here's the buttons you push to do it. So it'll be very much more geared towards, hey, here's how you do things, but why, what to look for, what are the limitations, what you're going to get from doing this kind of process, and not just how to do it. So there'll be a couple of different stages of this presentation. I initially built this presentation to be very scripted. I've kind of moved away from that as I've kind of gotten closer to the presentation today. But there will be some slides that we'll go through kind of that I built before, but after we do kind of an actual demonstration of how this kind of functionality works and how to use some of the Microsoft tools. To start with, why did I do this presentation? Now let's start with the why. Now there are a couple of reasons. Obviously, the obvious answer is everybody's trying to get into SharePoint and use M365 for their content management. Everybody's got things like shared drives, which will be kind of our starting point today. So there's always questions about this, but from other angles and other reasons to do this type of presentation has been around. I see a lot of, just for example, we see a lot of RFPs out there where a lot of people are trying to do this work, where they're at varying stages of it. And again, the name of these presentations, the series is a Learn With Us. So just that education on some of the technical aspects of it. Again, what I said before on limitations, what to know, what to look for. I see a lot of clients going out there and spending very large amounts of money to do what we'll refer to as lift and shift. As the technical aspect of this will be basically lift and shift to kind of demonstrate that that's really the easy part of all this, and that maybe we can help some people have the understanding of how some of this works, to maybe alleviate some of the cost burden on what people are paying for to get done in some of these cases. And then on the other side, to have the knowledge to do it. So there, if you are at this particular stage, doing some technical migrations of data for no cost or little cost to you, whether it's your IT department is going to implement some of this, or the records and information management aspect of it, or even just individual people and individual departments. One of the benefits to SharePoint, you can create it and set it up to be very modular. Team sites, there's the OneDrive aspect to it and all that. But some of this stuff will just demonstrate how to kind of get there, and just to have that understanding of what it is and what we can do with what we have. So what this is not going to be the setup of SharePoint. I'm not going to show how to acquire licenses for M365. I'm not going to show you how to set up a new SharePoint site. We're not going to configure it. We're not going to add any metadata columns. This is going to be kind of a strictly how to use the existing tools as they are. We're not going to look at the security side of it. It will be a very large part of our conversation at the end of this in terms of one of the things to consider when doing this type of projects. But as part of this, we're not going to be configuring any security and things like that. But as we'll see later in the demo, after we do kind of the technical part, when we get into the slides, I very much will highlight the deficiencies of what we just did and kind of how to address those. I don't expect this presentation to take very long. I've done it, kind of rehearsals of it. It is kind of pretty straightforward and pretty quick to run. We'll be looking at a shared drive. I'll share my screen here in a bit, and we'll actually look at kind of the areas we'll be working in. But before I do that, kind of just wanted to give a bit of a story to relate this to maybe something a little bit more generic, so that it's not all strictly records and information management lingo and technical jargon that we'll have to be dealing with. Just want to kind of start with what it is we're trying to do here in more of a generic story. So personally, I'm in the middle of moving. I'm actually in the middle of selling our house. So I thought this would be an appropriate way to think of this, is that we currently live in a house, which in this scenario will be our current shared drive. We live in a house, and I've got bedrooms, and I've got bathrooms, and I've got, a garage where I'm putting my stuff in the garage, and it's got its own organizational system. And I've got our bedroom where there's laundry on the floor, all that kind of stuff that we typically have after living in a house for about 8 years, in the current house I'm living in. Just like a shared drive, we've been moseying around using this part of it to do this functionality, and somebody's over here storing this stuff, and then there's this kid's bedroom that has a closet that says no boys allowed, and how do we kind of manage that moving into the new house? And one of the things I just want to highlight here, we'll get to later on in the slides, is that we wouldn't just pick up one item and put it in the same spot in the new house. The new house is going to be laid out differently, have different functionality, whether it's got a third bathroom, or in this case, SharePoint's got workflows. We wouldn't just pick up all of our kind of mess without doing some kind of cleaning, some kind of packing, organization, labeling, and that's kind of some of the stuff we'll see at the end. But for now, we're going to deal with our 8-year-old house. We have content into it. What would it look like to just move it into our new house? So let me go ahead and I'll share my screen at this point. And just bring this up. Share my screen at this point, and kind of talk through just kind of the demo part of this and what we're going to look at. If you guys read the interlude to this on the marketing material I sent out, there's going to be 2 kind of aspects of the Microsoft tools that we'll focus on. But before we get there, let's look at the shared drive and what we're going to look at today. So what I'm going to work in is this administration area. So this is our corporate records on our NAS. We've got a corporate file share where our general manager files to our corporate records, and sometimes I go in here and put my time logs, but I work in a different part where some of our development material is. But I'm going to work on our finance area and how we can kind of migrate this into SharePoint with these existing tools. So there's 2 tools we're going to look at. The first one is actually with the OneDrive. There's certain aspects of OneDrive, the application that's running locally on your computer, that can be used to help migrate material and content. And there's actually SharePoint migration tools in the SharePoint administration area that we'll actually look at to do some more formalized jobs for migration. But I thought I'd just start with the basics. The basic part here is that we've got a SharePoint site. I've already put in 2021 just so I had something to show at the migration part. The SharePoint migration takes a little bit to kick off and get going, so I've done one ahead of time. So just imagine this was kind of a clean site where we're going to put our finance stuff. So before I even go into the tools, the clear, easy way to get content into SharePoint, just for the sake of demonstrating, hey, you know what? You've got a folder that's got files in it. There is nothing stopping from you as a basic user. Hey, IT is giving me a SharePoint site for our site. How do I get content into it? And just dragging and dropping into this. Now, highlight some of the limitations of this. This runs in the browser. Uh, I do not recommend doing very large folder structures through this. That's kind of the intentions of the other tools, but you can see here that I just dragged and dropped and some files got put in here. But that's not the kind of point of this, is how can we do some of those migration activities where we're doing larger amounts of data to get to our SharePoint system. Before I go any further, I will highlight here, everything I'm doing today is with a business standard license. This can also be done with Business Basic. I just currently, this account that I'm logged into has a business standard license. Everything you see today, it does not require any of the E or enterprise licensing, E5 or E3 or anything like that. You can do this with the basic functionality. The one exception here is that the migration tool is in the admin area, and I'll talk about that when we get that. Usually IT needs to grant, whoever's administering your M365 would have to give you access to that. But it's a basic tool that everybody has access to. There's no extra licensing for anything I do today. Okay, so let's circle back here. So let's go back to that kind of first functionality that I like to use a lot of times when just moving some content in a basic, straightforward way into SharePoint sites. And it actually comes down to this sync or this SharePoint or add shortcut to OneDrive. These two act very similar, but I'm going to use this sync one, and I'll show you what this looks like in a second. But this is essentially going to allow us to sync up our Windows view of content, like we do in OneDrive, to this SharePoint site so that I have somewhere in my Windows Explorer to access this SharePoint site. Technically, what this is doing is putting a shortcut into your OneDrive application to say this is the area in which you're supposed to be monitoring to access content and manage the content. So when I actually click this, you'll get a notification that we're syncing your files. Sometimes you'll get a prompt here to allow your browser to access OneDrive for security reasons. But essentially what is done here is that in your Windows Explorer now, if I bring up what I just had up here, this one here, on the left-hand side of your Windows Explorer, you get another tab here for Western Information Management. That's our current M365. And here underneath, we'll get our synced locations for wherever you hit sync in your SharePoint site. So this particular one here, you can see I've got the 2001 folder and the new folder 4 that I dragged and dropped in there already. So you can probably see where this is going. Now that this area is essentially synced to that SharePoint site, nothing is stopping us from putting content into this folder that then can be migrated or synced to the SharePoint site. I'm sure a lot of people now are already thinking, okay, this makes a lot of sense, but what about this? What about this? What about this? That's kind of the demonstration here, is to also highlight the deficiencies in doing something like this, not necessarily saying this is how you should do migrations, but in some cases, we deal with a lot of small organizations that, hey, we just have SharePoint and we want to get our content in there. We don't need anything fancy. We're not trying to do any workflows and stuff. Now that we have this content platform, how do we get our current content into it? So yes, there's very much missing from this, but let's follow this through in terms of adding another year to this. So on our finance department, I wanted to add another year. So I'm going to actually go to our current NAS that we talked about and that we started out with here. And I'm going to go to the finance folder, and I said I've already got 21. So I'm going to do a copy and paste. I'm going to take our 2020 and I'm just going to paste it in. And now that this is being dealt with the OneDrive application, our OneDrive application on our desktops becomes our migration tool. It does all the monitoring, inventorying, deltas. Anytime you change something here, your SharePoint site will be reflected by this because of the nature of that tool. So it's not just migrating the information in here. This is actually a very useful two-way tool in order to use your SharePoint site as a typical file share that you'd be used to. I often like to highlight this because of user acceptance. A lot of people, a lot of IT departments, they'll say we're moving to we're moving to 365, and everybody has to deal with OneDrive and SharePoint sites now. No more shared drives. That usually doesn't go over very well with end users, upper management, people that are used to working in this. This allows them to not just do that migration of content, but then use it going forward just as if they were using a shared drive. So I very much like to highlight this, not just for this idea of getting content into SharePoint, but just using it going forward is very handy. So behind the scenes, what's actually happening here, just to give some more technical details, my taskbar is on the other screen, so I took a screenshot of this earlier. In the bottom right-hand side, you got a little blue icon for your SharePoint or your OneDrive syncs. Now I've got 3 different ones here. Usually the gray one is your personal one. Usually a blue one is your corporate one. I have a third one because of a development environment I have, but technically, usually you just have 2 or just the blue one. And if you actually click on that, you can see the migration happening here. This monitoring and syncing of content is going up into the SharePoint site. So you can see here some time logs from Daryl are being uploaded, and this is the migration tool. I didn't need to buy some third-party software. This is coming from somebody that's built software. Our AgileIM tool, for those who have seen it before, is a SharePoint migration tool as part of its functionality. This is the end of the aisle Toys R Us version of that, where we're just going to be moving content. And I think it does very well. The reason I like this one as well is because it is a monitoring tool. Any changes going forward, that kind of update will happen by the application without you having to know anything about the technical details of how the software is working. I want to highlight here one way to help with issues that happen doing this. Sometimes you'll get this, there are sync issues, a red box on the top of that. This helps you identify things that aren't getting synced. So often when we're doing migrations, we want to know where the errors were, what didn't work. This is a place within the OneDrive demonstration we're doing here that we can go in and check to make sure there's no issues with content being migrated. And if you click on this, it'll help you resolve those issues. Generally, it's very straightforward for most people migrating content this way, is that now I have my 2020 folder in here. And if I go back to my SharePoint site here, you can see our 2020 folder now exists here. Right, so we got some time processing here. The one cool thing I do like about the way SharePoint handles Windows files, because they're both Microsoft tools, is we often get system dates being honored here. This is one of few systems, I'm able to do it with our software tools as well, where we can see that the modified date on these files, just want to highlight this, one of the small technical details, but often is important to some users. We can see here modified date and create date, if I added it as well, are coming across as the system dates. What you do lose, to highlight a deficiency here, is I'm the one that copied it in there. We lost the initial creator of this folder, of this content. So yes, good in some ways, bad in another way. So that's the first tool, and that's kind of the straightforward, hey, let's just use the existing tools. Hey, I'm just an end user. I've got some content that I'm trying to get into SharePoint. This is one of the ways that I like to do it. So let's move on to the second tool. The second tool here is it's the SharePoint Migration Tool. And just to demonstrate how to get to it, it's in the SharePoint Administrative Console. I will start out in our office.com. So if you're logged in to your account, you'll usually see this screen when you go to office.com. If you go into, again, if your account has permissions, so this is a limitation, not an end user necessarily, but an IT or a user that's doing the implementation can give people access to this. If you go into admin, you'll go into the admin center. And this admin center helps you deal with users and things like that. But if you actually click show all here, you get access to kind of all the other stuff. This has got some of that compliance suite and security stuff here. But if you actually go to the admin center for SharePoint, this is where they have some tools for actual migration. So let me just just wanted to make sure I have chat up. You guys have any questions and stuff as well, because this is a live demonstration and I can answer them on the go too, but we'll spend some time at the end going through some questions. So SharePoint. So let's go into the SharePoint site or SharePoint administrator. So in here is the technical migration tools that are out of the box from Microsoft, other than what I just did with the OneDrive. So if I go into migrations here, they actually got quite a few here. Google migrations, Dropbox migrations, Box, all that kind of stuff. Some of the old legacy server SharePoint migration tools can be done here. So just to highlight some of these that you don't necessarily have to be going out to buy third-party software to do some of these, but we're going to look at this file share one. We're actually going to connect to that file share, that finance area we've already been working in, and we're going to migrate the 2019 files into our existing SharePoint site. I'm hoping this also demonstrates that we can build up to migrations. We don't necessarily have to go our entire 13 terabytes on the NAS drive into SharePoint sites all at once. This can be broken down whether have your department putting your files into SharePoint through the OneDrive Sync, or you have IT migrating the entire operations into a SharePoint site in this tool. You can kind of build up to this, and not everything has to happen all at once. So the way this tool works is, let me just refresh this. And as I refresh this, you'll see this button here, the download agent change. So if you haven't already done this, when you first come into this site, you'll see this idea to download an agent. And this is very similar to the OneDrive application that runs in the background that you don't really have an application for. It's just the agent that that this tool accesses to get to the files. So when you install this agent, I actually have a screenshot of that as well, because I've already done it here. I'll just bring this up. You'll get a screen that looks like this, a welcome screen. You'll install the agent. You log into the agent with your local system account so that it has permissions to access the drive. So just from a technical point of view, your Microsoft account might not be the one that's accessing the drive. It might be your local drive, especially if you're doing a full migration you might still have local accounts that need access to the drive. And this is what allows Microsoft to see your network drives. So let's go down here. I'm just going to start with the migration tool. I'm not going to go into all the technical parts of what can be done in this tool. I think it's a little bit outside of the scope. I just wanted to show here's the functionality that can be done very quickly and easily. There are some things in here with some logs in that can be viewed in that as well. But let's just go right to the migration one here. So you can see I've already got this 2021 migration that I did ahead of time just to demonstrate after I do this so you can see it done. But from here, we can actually start adding tasks. And this is what I talked about before. We can add tasks and break down our migrations so it's not all at once kind of thing. And just to do a simple one, we're going to take that go into my, let's see here, finance folder, and we're going to take 2019. So I'm going to copy this area here, so this path, network path to get there, and I go back into my tool so I don't have to type it out, and I'm going to take a single source and destination. And here you just enter the path to it. So I want to migrate the 2019 folder into our SharePoint site. And then we'll go next here. Pretty straightforward. We're migrating into a SharePoint site. Again, this could be into the OneDrive if you're migrating somebody, say, My Documents into their OneDrive, things like that. But again, we're going to focus on the SharePoint side here. And where do I want to migrate to? So I'm going to migrate to this particular SharePoint site that I have. I'm going to go into the finance folder, and I'm going to create a new folder here that allows me just to set up a new folder for 2019. Again, if I was migrating all the finance folders and all the years at the same time, we'd start at a higher level here, but I'm just going to create a particular one for 2019 on my SharePoint site. And that's going to add that folder that I'm going to be putting the content into. And then we just hit next. And here we can say 2019. And we just label it the way we want. We want it to run now. Maybe we want this running overnight, that kind of thing. Again, there's some other tools in here. I won't highlight them all, but there are some ways to do a minor amount of cleanup as part of this. There are things like hidden files, older files that can be weeded out at this particular stage with the SharePoint migration tool. But for the purpose of this, we're just going to go ahead and run. And again, this one usually takes a little bit. So I've already gone ahead and done 2021, but we'll see here maybe by the end of the presentation that the 2019 has come in. So a couple of quick comments here. We originally went with OneDrive shortcuts and syncs to access by file manager. We're having problems with processing capacity across the organization with syncs, and they're having some significant sync issue problems. Yeah, timing with these types of tools is very important. You saw there when I showed a couple of errors with the SharePoint syncs is that I deliberately went in and started making changes to content on the SharePoint site as it was happening to trigger sync errors that then had to get resolved. So I could show that as part of that screenshot there. So timing becomes very important on these migrations. Generally like to do things, when people aren't doing other work. But again, that's one of the limitations with these is that, they're prone to have, day-to-day issues when doing these kind of migrations. I might have missed this. The OneDrive sync only works to individual OneDrives. Does it work to regularly collaborate across SharePoint sites? Yeah, so Carolyn, the way you can set up, I'll come back to the OneDrive sync here, but that left-hand side can be set up for every user for any number of SharePoint sites. So it doesn't necessarily just have to be OneDrive. The sync functionality can be used for SharePoint sites that everybody can kind of sync up to. Yeah, I'll bring that up here at the end and show a little bit more. And we've got a couple of questions in Q&A. Okay. There it is. Okay. Okay, let me finish this up and then I'll come back to some questions before I do slides here. So just to finish up kind of what we were looking at here, the 2019 has been started and kicked off. We might be able to see the 2019 folder here. Okay, so it hasn't kicked off yet, but for timing purposes, I did that same exercise on 2021, and now you can see the content has been migrated in here. Highlight here, again, we're still being able to honor system dates, which some people really like, especially records management that likes to do lifecycle stuff off of modified and create dates. But in this particular case, it was system accounts that are marked as the creator of this, not the person that did the copy and paste in the OneDrive sync. So just to highlight there's one thing to heads up that you're going to be losing the original creator on some of this. And this is where some of the other tools might come in handy where you can capture some of this other metadata. Okay, let me revisit some questions here before I go into slides then. You're demonstrating keeping the same folder structure. Yes, that's kind of the idea here, Donna, to highlight the deficiencies. When we're moving houses, we just picked it up and put it in the same room in the other thing. We didn't do the laundry first. We didn't throw away the garbage. We didn't do any of that kind of stuff. So this was just to demonstrate how we can migrate, but to also highlight these deficiencies, right? We're not doing packing, we're not doing labeling, we're not doing any of that kind of stuff as part of this. So it was very much to highlight that the missing of that. Yeah. Do you recommend minimizing how much content you're moving to keep the project manageable? For example, you need to move 30 years of finance files. Yeah, that comes down to kind of how much you have in each year kind of thing. Yes, I very much suggest breaking it out. A lot of times what we'll do is work on, what's relevant. Say we have 30 years of finance stuff. Maybe we're just doing last year's because we're still referencing it. And then as we go forward, we can migrate the previous years in, or we'll do one department at a time to make sure that the onboarding and there's less training that has to happen and less number of issues that can come up because we only have that department and not 3 departments kind of doing it as well. So should we be moving away from folders? That depends. When it comes down to folder structures, I personally like to work not in folders. I like to work in kind of that metadata organizational driven views, especially within SharePoint or our Agile IM tool. But I don't suggest moving away from it because other people don't work that way. We still want end users to be able to do their work. And keeping current folder structures can be a way to help user acceptance go forward. Is it the best way to work? No, that's kind of where, again, some of the deficiencies here, that's where you bring in the, records management consultants and things like that, or even just internal projects to review naming conventions and organizational structures and things like that, that we would want to move this content into rather than just taking what we currently had and having the same problem when we move into the new house. Yep. Good, so here we can actually see 2019 is starting to come in. So again, I just wanted to demonstrate how to use things like OneDrive Syncs and SharePoint migration tools so that when you're maybe doing this internally, you're not going out and spending tens of thousands or lots of money to have consultants to come in to do easy work. This is kind of what I feel is the straightforward end of the aisle in Toys R Us off the shelf kind of software. This didn't build you the Death Star Lego set, right? So when we're getting into best practices, developing policies for retention, doing cleanups ahead of time, doing things like dedupe, some of these tools aren't there, but at the same time, dealing with a small organization that has, 500 gigs on a shared drive that just needs to get into SharePoint because then they can have better collaboration and access from anywhere, that this would be the way to go, and you wouldn't necessarily need to have that full RM project implementation uptick. So both educational, helpful in getting some work done, and the realization on the other end here, what we're going to get into on the deficiency is of what we didn't do as part of this. Once folders are synced, you can delete the folders from the OneDrive or will deleted information in SharePoint as it becomes synced. Is there a way to disconnect? Yes, there are ways to disconnect the two. If you actually go into the settings, again, it's on my other screen here, it'd be hard to show. You can remove that sync and then clean up your local sync of it as well. The other way to do it as well, just to quickly demonstrate, is, let me pull it up here. There's often ways within the OneDrive settings here. There's this stop sync. So I just right-clicked on that folder, that folder we've been working in here that syncs to the OneDrive or SharePoint site. Under OneDrive here, you can stop sync. You can also do other functionalities within OneDrive that cleans up the local version of it and only keeps the online version so that your C drive isn't flooded with all this content, but you still have a sync of it as well, or a reference to it as well. And the way the OneDrive works is that not all your files are kept on your computer at all times. It manages how much is kept, when it's cleaned up, and when only references are left behind. Sometimes when you're opening files from SharePoint, if it's only online and you just have the reference, you sometimes see that download box. There's a way to force all the content to go off your computer and still keep the sync as well. Okay, this is actually taking longer than I thought it was going to take. So let's hop into the slides. So as I had mentioned, I initially started doing this presentation more structured, more scripted, and I built some slides here that I'd like to just kind of scroll through quickly to kind of highlight some of those, give us some talking points on some of the things that we didn't do here, some of the benefits to what we did, and just to highlight some of the limitations as well. So again, I've already talked about the introduction here, and we kind of jumped past this, but we took a look at the benefits of migrating. Hey, you're online now. You can do things with more collaborative, easily access from anywhere. The other benefits to this too is that you can start implementing some other functionality you didn't have before, workflows, backup strategies, better security permissions. One of the things that often happens with migrations to SharePoints is that you start being able to be a little bit more granular with security. We set up a SharePoint site for Group A and Group B that was a lot easier to do in a SharePoint environment than having our IT try to implement it on the shared drive. And we talked about some of the challenges, and we'll actually go through a bunch of these here as we go through slides. So issues and limitations. This is a moving target. I do find this to be a moving target when it comes to issues and limitations. And it's not just the migration part of it too. It's often the limitations of SharePoint itself. The idea of views and folders not being able to manage more than 10,000 files. And if you start putting more files than that in, you start losing functionality, or search stops indexing. And there are going to be limitations with the system you put in. Just like there are limitations on the shared drive, nothing has everything, but just a heads up that there are going to be some limitations you're going to run into with SharePoint. Again, some of the migration tools like the OneDrive Sync, just like you have issues on your local drives with folder paths that are longer than 400 some characters, you start running into issues in being able to do those. The OneDrive Sync often will have that same issue if you have very deep folder structures. So you do have to be cognizant that some of these tools you could run into limitations on just being able to do what I showed today, just to the nature of what the tools are. Permissions, we kind of talked about this a little bit. Obviously, what I just did here today is I migrated in existing SharePoint site. None of the permissions from the shared drives got migrated as part of what I did today as well. So not just migration issues that you might not have permissions for files or that, but on the other end, the permissions issues that you'll have. Often what we do is we'll work with our clients when we start doing implementations is build that permissions and security architecture into the sites before we put content into them. So that when the content does get into them, they're inheriting the permissions of where they go. I find that to be the easiest and straightforward way to do it. There are ways with some of the Microsoft tools to, if you have the same Active Directory, to migrate permissions as part of the migrations tools. But generally, people are coming from legacy Active Directory systems and shared drives into new accounts on SharePoint and new SharePoint sites. So it's just something to take into consideration as part of the migration process. That security is something you'll have to look at ahead of time. Synchronization errors. I talked about this a little bit in terms of the errors that come up in the OneDrive sync. There are also areas within the migration tool that has logs that allows you to see all the files that were migrated and any errors that happened as well. Again, I tried not to spend too much time on the migration tools, but that's an area where we do get some logging and some indications of errors that are happening. Yeah, longer document names. You'll often see the longer document names issues come up in the scan logs that'll tell you that there were even character limitations on names as well. I already talked about a lot of this here. Again, what Rick just said there, limit on namings, but some of the file types can cause issues. Sometimes performance, this can be an issue as well. If you're trying to do large amounts of things on crappy computers with terrible network connections over VPNs, that you can often run into issues, just performance issues on actually running these. I do find them to be fairly quick. Like I said, that both those folders that we did for 21 and 19 had 1,000 or 2,000 files in them, and they were done within a couple of minutes after they kicked off in terms of the migrate one, but they are fairly quick. When you start getting into the terabytes, that's when timing issues come up. As mentioned here, you run into sync errors as people start using things. Changes happen and things like that. So just a heads up on timing is also a very big factor of this. And the lack of flexibility. I'm going to have a whole slide on this later, but what you saw today didn't capture any new metadata, didn't reorganize, didn't dedupe, didn't account for characters. It didn't do any of that stuff. So that is one of the issues. File types support, not just in the migration of them. We often run into this as files are getting into SharePoint that might not necessarily handle well in SharePoint. Email messages, for example. I don't know if you've ever tried to pull up an email in a SharePoint. It's just basically a flat text file that you get on your screen. So that becomes an issue. Things like engineering drawings. Obviously, you're trying to open engineering drawings through SharePoint Online. You're going to run into issues. I will say, people bring this up a lot, but I will say I've had very good luck on managing any type of content in the OneDrive sync of these sites and opening and accessing files with the local Windows Explorer view of it, opening local applications and not trying to open them in online applications. For example, I did a recent experiment where I took one of my development coding projects, and put it in a OneDrive and started rebuilding it and making changes. And there are thousands of files and they're very large projects. It had no problem with the OneDrive sync, keeping that synced with online, the SharePoint Online. But when I went into that SharePoint Online site and tried to open one of those files, it didn't know what to do with it and just tried to download it. But using the local one, I was able to do it in OneDrive sync because it's a monitoring tool, not just a one-time migration. It keeps that two-way sync very well. And then, yeah, just depending on what kind of files. And then lack of flexibility, right? If you're trying to implement online, you're stuck with the functionality of SharePoint. It's a great platform. It's got all kinds of things with Power Apps and work automates and all things like that. If you get into the compliance sections, you can do things with data discovery and things like that. But at the end of the day, we just still want to make sure that people are still being able to do their work, right? if it is the case, I'll give you another example. We were dealing with somebody recently that had an Access database that had a backend file to where the database tables lived in the front end with forms, but those two files needed to reference each other. When we migrate those into SharePoint, that link is broken. That you'll often get that in spreadsheets as well. They could not do their client management anymore after the migration because that link broke. So we needed to implement some other solution for that application in order to fully decommission their shared drive. So again, there's going to be some limitations no matter what system you go into that you'll have to account for. That might not just be Word documents and PDF documents that you have to account for. That's pretty much it. So again, just to go back, we talked about the OneDrive syncs, we talked about the migration tools, some of the limitations, how these are easily implemented. If you're looking to do that, hey, I got some content, I'd like to get into SharePoint. We're just, we don't need to reorganize, we don't need to clean up or anything like that. This stuff is great tools, and you don't need to be going out getting very expensive, resources to come in to do lift and shifts. We often go into organizations and their shared drive is clean. It is very well organized. It's very well manageable. We're very well managed, and it would make sense just to do something like this to put it into their organization. And don't necessarily need huge budgets and RFPs and things like that to maybe get some of this work done. But on the other end, hey, you're moving, you've lived in that house for 8 years and now you've got to move. You're very unlikely going to want to just pick up the laundry off the floor and put it on the floor in the new bedroom at the new house. So what can we do to address those? And that's things like deduplication, some kind of disposition based off of policies within your organization. We may want to reorganize. You've got 3 extra rooms in the new house. You don't need to have everything in one room. Maybe we need to split some of that out. So although this is great, all the tools get you a migration into SharePoint as records and information management, crowd that we have here today. Those other things are where we're going to run into deficiencies. And I know I'm seeing some of the names in chat. This is kind of some of the stuff you've all had to deal with at some point, or even a couple of us have worked together on a couple of these things before. So just to highlight the tools, I hope that kind of gave you some information on some how-tos, but also some heads up. Good. So Rick, are you there? I think I've gone through all the questions. I think I kind of answered all the questions. Like I said, I didn't expect today's presentation to take too long, but as we stick around here, if anybody else has a question, we can answer here in the next few minutes.
That was a great presentation, Troy. Really, really great. I think it helps to add some value to everybody too when everybody's dealing with this kind of movement from old to new. A lot of people are in that position right now, having to deal with those things. So I think this is a great aid to a lot of people just to get an idea about other ways or ways that this is going to work. I would say too that for those of you that are coming on, signing up for the next Learn With Us will be out there sometime soon. You'll get a new thing. The next one will be by one of my other partners, Daryl Schrader, who is our longtime professional services director. And Daryl will be doing a session on AI in the next one as well, because I think people are still struggling a little bit with what do we do about AI and how does it work in various areas. So I think Daryl will be able to shed a lot of light on that one too. Troy, thanks so much for the presentation today. Anything else you'd like to do last?
No, I actually, just you mentioned the AI, I definitely deliberately left AI out of this to make it a non-AI topic, kind of as we're discussing today. So the next one, I know everybody's kind of hot on the AI trail, so it'll be good to see what, and we've been using it a lot, even in our internal Agile IM tool to do migrations like this, where we have been leveraging AI. It would be great to see Daryl's.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to Daryl's presentation as well. Thanks everybody for being here today with us. As always, we appreciate all our friends being on our sessions on an ongoing basis. So hope to see you on the next one, and hopefully see some of you in the future at events. Anybody that was in Houston at the Army International Conference, good to see all of you. And the next big conference will be Montreal in the spring for the Canadian National Conference. So thanks very much. Look forward to it and see you on the next session.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
Troy.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.